purpose of this quick coffee break webinar is to have a punchy half-hour introduction to a specific issue which will be of use to us at Agency My and our clients in working together to build more effective digital work. And this week, we're looking specifically at the Kano model, which was developed back in the 1980s, and how this can be used 4 decades on in a rather more digital age to help us invest budget to maximize the impact of our digital work. Now, I did that little intro explaining that this is largely for Agency My and our clients. I know a lot of other people who aren't involved with us also keep an eye on these webinars and videos, but that will become relevant at the end because there is actually a fundamental question about how we interact with our clients, which is highlighted by this. But to explain why we're looking at the Kano model in a digital context, the Kano model was created as a way of understanding what features of the products that you're developing, for example, physical products, are going to appeal to different users or to appeal to users generally. What sort of features do they really want? So if we think back to the 1980s, people were consuming media via video recorders, and then in the 90s, DVD players. And people are buying these machines where it's not just the features that lead to the price point being sustainable or people's satisfaction with the product being provoked. So you might buy a DVD player and you think, well, all it needs to do is play a DVD. But maybe the way in which the tray slides out, the little bleeping noises it makes, the LED display, all of these things add to your appreciation of the product. And it was very difficult back in the 1980s for people to understand how this was really working. And anybody who remembers back then might remember that you would buy something like a video player or a DVD player, and it would come a little card that said, you know, rate your satisfaction on various criteria and send it in to this address for a chance to win something. And people were desperate to try and understand what people were really liking. Now the Kano model in a more digital age is actually more useful to us, because when we talk about customer satisfaction, we're not just talking about, are they pleased they bought a DVD player? We're looking at the way in which people interact with digital applications, the way in which they interact with websites. So customer satisfaction on a website might be bounce rate, low bounce rate. It might be the average amount that they spend on an e-commerce site. It might be the likelihood of a job applicant applying for a job once they've got to the careers page. So when we say we want customers to be satisfied, we want people to spend money. We want prospects to become leads. We want applicants to apply for jobs. For an application, we want people to get involved with the application, keep using it, start recommending it to their friends. For that cool little calculator we've built that your social media people are sending out, we want people to be really delighted by it and engaged with it, so they recommend it to their friends and they hit the share button. So all of these things, weirdly, in the 1980s, it was kind of, is the customer satisfied? Does this help us build the brand equity? Right now, it's, is the customer satisfied? Are they doing the things we want them to do? Are they buying? Are they registering interest? Are they sharing, etc.? So this idea of measuring customer satisfaction and understanding customer satisfaction is actually more relevant to us now. But what I'll do is I'll first explain the model, and I'll start off with quite an old-fashioned example. So if I go to this and hit share, okay, get that out of the way. So the idea of the Kano model is that when you're building any sort of product, you build in features. And these features are of 3 different varieties. The threshold features that you have to build, because without it, it doesn't really work. Performance attributes. This is how well do the individual features work? What additional cool little features have we built in? And excitement attributes, the things that make people feel in a certain way that really engage them. And what we see here is a relationship between how well the product functions on the bottom and how satisfied people are with that. Now, if you do a Google search for different graphs, you'll see people show this slightly differently, and that might be a function of their industries or their personal agendas. But sometimes the threshold attributes line is almost flat. It's like, well, once you've built the threshold attribute, building it better doesn't really help. But where you get massive increase in customer engagement, in customer satisfaction, in emotional response, is with these excitement attributes, where you can, for relatively little implementation, you can get a big emotional buy-in from the consumer, from the user. So let's go through these using the example of a car. As I said, quite an old-fashioned example to show how this works. So our first issue is the threshold attribute. It's a car, right? The engine has to work. It has to drive the drive wheels forward. You need to guide the car by using the steering wheel. The dash needs to give you basic information about speed and so forth. If it's an automatic, the gear shifts need to occur at roughly the right time. It basically has to function. And of course, it has to hit certain safety requirements, and there are regulatory issues regarding emissions for the environment and so forth. You have to do that stuff. The next thing is your performance attributes. So for a car, this might be something that the car consumes fuel. Can we make it more efficient? So can we improve our fuel efficiency? The car has to travel forward. Can we make it go faster? Can we increase speed? Can we increase acceleration? Can we add in other features that people will appreciate? You know, when the aircon comes on, does it have that nasty fake aircon smell, or does it feel genuine and fresh? So these are all features that we can build in better or add in new features. Hey, let's have heated seats in the back as well as in the front or whatever. And these obviously people appreciate. The better your features are implemented and the more of them you've got, people do appreciate that. So it's kind of a linear relationship here going up between the level of implementation and the satisfaction. And then your excitement attributes is what really gets people emotionally engaged. And with cars, that's weird. If you look at luxury cars, there is no relationship between any quantifiable performance attribute and how much people are willing to pay or how much they love their luxury cars. And very often, if we just think of speed, for example, you can get a car that goes insanely fast for a fraction of the cost of a high-end Porsche, for example. But your Porsche or your Bugatti or whatever it is, or the Ferrari, is going to be the thing that people get really emotionally engaged with. And car manufacturers put a huge amount of effort into very minor issues. Before you've even started the engine, you've closed the door. The sound of that door clunking, right? Does it feel solid? Does it inspire confidence? You know, and you think of something as big as a car and all the tiny little details from the digital display on the heads-up display that has now replaced your old-fashioned dashboard, the sound of the door, the feel of the gear stick, the whole driving experience. It's an amalgam of tons of tiny little things which build up to be the difference between a luxury car and your second-hand Skoda, right? So if we take this in a more comprehensible, slightly more digital example than a car, think of Nokia versus iPhone. When the iPhone was launched, a lot of analysts said, well, Nokia haven't really got much to worry about. I mean, this iPhone's pretty, right? It's cool, it's cute, it's a nice gadget, but the Nokia's got so much better features, and the battery lives on the Nokia are way, way better than the iPhone battery life. The iPhone battery life's rubbish, really. No, Nokia don't need to worry. What iPhone did do, what Apple did do with the iPhone, is they totally focused on the iPhone as the experience. All of the effort went into what we can see here on this chart as excitement attributes. Right? The battery life is a performance attribute. Yeah, of course you want a longer battery life. But you remember when the iPhone came out, how clunky phones felt, what the sort of chunky experience was of using those phones. And now you've got this lovely swipe on the screen. And you've got these virtual buttons. And when you tap on the virtual buttons, it's this lovely, gratifying little flicking noise. Right? Imagine explaining that to your chief finance officer or an accountant. We're going to invest money in a lovely clicking noise. How does that help? But because they put all these excitement attributes together, because everything was so well considered and so well polished, it became an experience. And where is Apple now? Where is the iPhone now? And where is Nokia? So the consumers went with the experience, with the excitement attributes, not with the performance attributes of the Nokia. And if we think about this from a digital point of view, we can look at this and say, well, our threshold attributes are, if we're building an app, it has to install off the App Store. Obviously, it has to run on my device. If it's a website, I want it to load in a halfway sane amount of time. I'm not going to hang around forever and think, oh God, is it timed out? It has to load, right? We have to integrate pieces of software that the business needs. We might need our HR software in there, or our lead management software, our CRM system. We might need digital marketing tools. All of that needs to work invisibly behind the scenes, but the customer doesn't care or ever really see it. It has to be responsive across all devices. It needs to work on different browsers. So, the customer, if it doesn't work on their phone and it's incorrectly sized for their phone, they're not going to use it. It doesn't matter how good any of these other things are. You kind of have to get the threshold attributes right. Then the next thing up is your performance attributes. And performance attributes is kind of, whereas threshold attributes is largely back-end development, the performance attributes is what we normally think of with an app or a website. What does it do? What can I see? How can I interact with it? And this goes through a fairly conventional UX design says how the information is laid out. Graphic design says what it looks like. Front end with necessary back end development involved will build that out for you. And that's really easy to understand because that's what we expect apps and websites to do. They have features, right? They have, we need a new resource library. We want a better way of showing videos. We want to integrate our HR solution with a website, et cetera, right? They're features. And the excitement attributes is where your UX or your design is really coming into play. And instead of the UX just being it has to work, it's we make the experience as slick as possible and intuitive as possible. It's where the design doesn't just look nice, but it really communicates strongly. It gets you emotionally engaged. And potentially we're going to be looking at a whole load of other elements within this as well. Like, do we do 3D renders? Do we have bespoke illustrations? Are we commissioning photography, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But these are all things that they're not features. It's how much polish and love and emotional engagement can we get in there. So it's kind of more feel than is, right? How does it feel, not what is it? So if we then take this forward and think about this, how we build a project out of this, well, the first thing is that I've just swapped the two axes there. I'm now saying effectiveness and effort. How effective is this thing in getting the customer to do what we want, getting the user to do what we want, getting them to absorb our messaging, getting them to understand the benefits, getting them to use the app, getting them to recommend it to their friend, getting them to explore the app more deeply for the features that we want them to use, getting them to socially share the materials we've created, whatever it is, right? So how effective is it on one, and how much effort are we putting in? So from a project planning point of view, this kind of product function, well, products function because effort has been invested in actually making them function. So where are we going to put that? And we can see that this is very different skills that we're going to need here. So technically speaking, threshold attributes, I say, are back-end. Performance attributes are more your UX, your design, your developers, and excitement attributes is likely to be the creative side of it, or a more in-depth UX take, or additional assets, or really freakish front-end coding. The kind of, oh my God, how do they even do that front-end coding? That's where we get the excitement. Going back to the iPhone, the button doesn't just press, the button feels beautiful when you press it. Okay. Now, something else to think about here is what we've actually just sketched here. Yes, we're talking about the features that we build. We're also talking about the people who are involved. And we're talking about the people who are involved from two perspectives. One is who needs to be on our project. So our threshold attributes absolutely requires back-end programmers, right? Unless it's a really simple app that doesn't do anything on a server, it just sits on the front end, in which case the whole thing can be done with front-end devs. But it's development, right? It's coders. Then our performance attributes requires UX, and it requires design, and it requires dev. But it's more that they need to be technically competent than inspired. Once we get into the excitement attributes, it could be a huge range of different skill sets that you need, and it's a different approach to the application of those skills. So if you've got a product or an app that you're building where you don't really care about the consumer being engaged, it just kind of has to work and sit there. And let's be honest, a lot of business websites are like that. The business has to have its contact details and a few bits of information on the website. Nobody really cares if you're overly engaged with it. Fine, brilliant. Get a freelance admin and get a template from Wix or Squarespace, right? If all you care about is threshold attributes, then you've got quite a limited number of skills that you need to apply to it. And you're accepting that it's never really going to be all that effective. It's never really going to engage the consumer. Nobody cares. That's fine. As you start building up to the excitement attributes, then you're going to have more people, more specialist skills, more time spent on it. It's a completely different type of project, but that's where you get something that's effective. And that kind of sounds loaded. It sounds like I'm being dismissive of those small business websites. I'm not being dismissive. If you only have 5 visitors a day, and most of those have got to your site by accident, and all you really care about is that once a month a prospect can find your phone number and phone you, it doesn't matter whether you're hugely effective. Whereas if you're turning over millions of dollars a month in e-commerce revenue, for example, or if you're recruiting for hard to fill positions, then how many people apply for those positions is massively important. How much money people spend, what the percentage of people who drop off is, etc. All the excitement attribute stuff becomes massively important to you. So for some projects, we're just going to be honest about this and say we don't need the excitement attributes because really we don't need it to work. I say we, I think it would be hard to understand why Agency My would get involved in that. It's hard to understand why anybody would ask us to. Right? If you really just need something that basically sort of works, then find a freelancer and get them to do something that basically sort of works. That's fine. People are only really going to be engaging us if they want, a more impressive application, more impressive implementations of performance attributes, or if they want the excitement attributes. But it changes the people who need to be involved. The other human element of this is to think about how this works in an organizational context. If we're talking about we are creating something, and that includes our key stakeholders, or at least our point of contact at the client, they're included in that we, right? We're creating this thing together. At the client end, our point of contact has got a load of pressures operating on them. And us as Agency My, or as any other agency, or even an internal team, we've got certain assumptions which become embedded or become habituated to our thinking processes internally. So if the threshold attributes are largely the tech guys, you have to have tech guys involved to get any sort of product out there, but you've now got a certain momentum behind, oh, we have to get the tech right. And there's a danger that you will overinvest in the tech once you've got to that point. Meanwhile, on the client side, the client has loads and loads of stakeholders, right? And stakeholders can be very powerful, and they will almost always argue for features. That is, for performance attributes. So with the dynamic between an internal team or Agency My or an agency or whoever it is, and a client, you will find that you have certain vested interests, such as the programmers who are constantly pushing for threshold attributes. You're looking at lots of potentially very powerful stakeholders who are constantly pushing for performance attributes. And we can think through how some of that might work. So if you've got somebody who's a kind of visionary champion in a startup saying, I'm going to create an app that does this and it's going to be awesome, that person is probably kind of an expert user. They imagine all the different ways in which an app could be used and what a user might want to do with it. The reality is that many users only use a fraction of the functions of any application if it's a complex application. Right? So you've already got a really strong voice within your organization for over-engineering the product. Meanwhile, if you think of how much power sales and commercial people organizations sales and commercial people often have in organizations, and rightly so, right? Organizations live or die based on the revenue they generate. It's right that the people who generate the revenue should be heard. But you'll often get salespeople saying, oh no, I couldn't make that sale because we haven't got this feature. And that could be absolutely true. Or it could be just a lame excuse that the prospect came up with because they know that it can't be argued with and it's closed down the conversation. The salesman was never going to happen anyway. Or it could be actually that the sales guy's never going to hit his quarterly figures and he's coming up with excuses. You don't know, right? So sometimes the feedback from sales is massively valuable and sometimes it's absolute rubbish. But sales will always be very powerful. And salespeople tend to be quite persuasive when they're putting forward their case. So you'll find a whole load of stakeholders who are arguing for features. You've got techie guys who are arguing for threshold attributes. And one of the other commercial issues which we deal with Agency My, because we tend to work for quite fast-paced businesses who are looking for strong growth, who are trying to make an impact in the market, we tend not to work for kind of slow incumbents, is people will also often be looking for ways to cut corners. So one of the classic things with startups is startups notoriously underinvest in technology. they build up huge amounts of technical debt. You will get a kind of charismatic, capable hacker, mid-level programmer who can put together a series of demos that look great. That grows into a product and has incurred an insane amount of technical debt. Right? But of course, this person is probably now your CTO and doesn't want to admit their own limitations because, hey, they've got share options to consider, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you've now got screwed up technology, which the organization, because it wants to move fast, introduce new features and roll out new product variants and so forth, is going to push you to continue building up technical debt. And technical debt is something that's like a credit card. If you go, well, I kind of need to bridge for the next couple of weeks until payday, great, I'll use my credit card and I'll always pay my credit card off at the end of the month. Credit cards are brilliant. Technical debt in the short term can be a fantastic thing to do that allows you to hit a release date, for example. But if your credit card becomes, here's another thing I want but I can't afford, I'll just use the credit card for it, then you've got the angry letter from the bank and you've got the debt collection agency and you're applying for personal bankruptcy. And from a company point of view, you will go the same way if you just endlessly build up technical debt. So the human factors are influencing this. And it's absolutely worth us keeping in mind when we're planning a project how different voices might be heard a little bit too loudly at different stages of these discussions. Of course, I just haven't mentioned the excitement attributes, have I? For the last 3 or 4 minutes, I've been talking about all the vested interests and all the stakeholders who are arguing for the threshold attributes and the performance attributes. But who's arguing for the excitement attributes? That's where, with the smallest amount of effort, we make the biggest emotional impact on the customer, on the end user. No one's arguing for it. It's in nobody's interest. I mean, you might get an annoying UX person who keeps telling you that you're underinvesting in UX and he's easy to shut up. And you might get a prima donna creative director who really wants to be considered more important, but they're just prima donnas, right? We can ignore them. They might be the only people actually arguing for the things that are really important in terms of how this will impact the consumer. And so by coming up with this as a model, we can take our product backlog and we can say, here's all the things that have been suggested. What really makes an impact and what's just things that are being shouted for? We can take this Kano model and we can put that next to our product backlog. And we can use this to make sure that we're not over-indexing on things that have powerful supporters, that we are actually investing in things that are important as well as the things that are being shouted for. So this is a great way to get some perspective. It has limitations. Okay, so for one thing, it assumes that there's a thing called a user. Right? If I go back to customer statistics, right, customer satisfaction, how satisfied is the customer? There's no such thing as a customer. So thinking about my comment about very often you'll have a vision holder or somebody who works in a company who works in the particular field that you're in. If it's an app for use in an engineering context, that person's probably an engineer. They will be speaking as an expert user, and they'll be saying we have to have more complicated features, we have to be really pushing up performance attributes. In reality, some users do not want that. And if we take, for example, Adobe with After Effects. After Effects is a fantastic video editing program. It takes you a couple of weeks to get to the point where you're kind of familiar with the basics, and it takes you several years to get to the point where you can really do good work with it. And it's utterly incomprehensible for somebody who comes to it new. But as an application, it's stunning if you're an expert user. Consequently, Adobe have released a product called Rush, where any idiot, more or less, can watch a 3-minute tutorial and then start editing videos together. Because with After Effects, the more they've put into it, the more utterly incomprehensible it is to most users. So kind of who is the user that we're appealing to? In some cases, performance attributes kind of become a negative. And there is a concept which isn't on here called reverse satisfaction, that when you're building in features to products or into websites, the more features you put in, the less people like it. And Apple are fantastic at this. There is a reason why Apple's products are incredibly simple or feel simple to use. And it's not because they were lazy. It actually takes longer to do something simple than to do something complicated. It's Mark Twain, right? I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one. So it is misleading to look at this to think that performance attributes always go up. The more performance attributes we have and the more complicated we make them, the more the user will like that, because some users absolutely won't. So yeah, there are limitations to this. But looking specifically at how we can practically use this, this is a fantastic framework for discussion and planning. We can talk to a client, or the client can talk to their stakeholders about, well, we need, in order to get the customer really satisfied, to start building in some excitement attributes. We don't want to overdo the threshold attributes. We have this conversation a lot internally at Agency Y. We don't always say threshold attributes, but very often the programmers will say, oh, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. It's like, great, I totally appreciate why you want to do this, but we haven't got the budget. We haven't got the budget doesn't mean we haven't got the budget. It means we've got better things to do with the budget. We've got things that will get clearer business outcomes for the client. So we can control the threshold attributes side of it a little bit. Where the client's point of contact needs to be involved is making sure that the project doesn't over-index on performance attributes. A couple of things that very often happen with junior product managers is junior product managers can sometimes have very little power within the organization, and they can be subject to all these requests from much more powerful stakeholders. The company founder, the sales team, whoever it is, we're all saying, we must have this feature. And whenever the company founder, who's the vision holder, says feature, whenever the sales guys say feature, it pretty well always has the word must attached to it. We must have this feature, right? And the product manager can just feel completely browbeaten by this. Meanwhile, they're aware of the fact that whoever's doing the work, whether it's us or an internal team or somebody, is going to be saying, dude, we do not have the budget for this. This is insanity. And so the sacrifices get made on the threshold attributes, and we build up technical debt. So if these areas are not managed well, we can end up building in features we didn't need and building up huge amounts of technical debt, while building in absolutely no excitement attributes, which is what will actually impress the customer. Another point on this is to think of this as a process and to think of it in terms of the client and the client stakeholders. When we say customer satisfaction, yes, we're talking about the end user, but we're also talking about the client and their stakeholders. So if, as the team developing the website or the app or whatever, if we deliver a website or an app which does not really engage the customer, it doesn't really engage the client either. The client will look at it and go, oh, I was hoping for more. I'm not that impressed by this. I'm kind of losing confidence in this project. And then when they see the actual data back, I remember what I'm saying at the beginning, we now know what customer satisfaction means. It means Joe applications, leads, prospects, dwell time on site, drop-off rate on your cart, recommendations of application use, lifetime value per user, all of these things. We measure all of these, right? The client, having maybe been the product manager who's been browbeaten into incurring technical debt and over-indexing on the performance attributes, now they're not satisfied either. Right? The client's not satisfied. Sorry, the end user's not satisfied. The client, when they see the work, isn't satisfied. And then when the client sees the results from the work and they get feedback, whether it's data or whether it's anecdotes, they're triply not satisfied. So there are huge numbers of pressures within organizations towards delivering something which does not satisfy, and which then imperils the relationship between the team doing the work and the client organization. Because if we think about this, it's easy to build up technical debt, but we can push back against that because our engineering guys want to over-engineer it. Maybe we'll get a happy medium there, fine, but we could end up building technical debt. The performance attributes we could over-index on. What happens further down the line? What happens further down the line is that the client says, oh, we weren't really happy with this. Right, we pushed you to do more performance stuff. Every time you said, here's some excitement attributes we want to build in, we said, oh no, we're not doing that. We haven't got budget because we have to get these performance attributes in. And now they're not satisfied. So by focusing on this model, we can try and keep the client and the client stakeholders focused on the need to not just tick boxes, but to actually invest in areas that make a difference. So that kind of runs through several ways that we can use this. Firstly, we can use this to understand what different types of features are going to impact on the customer and how they're going to behave with the application or the website. We can also use this with our backlog so that we can plan what elements get developed in each sprint or each monthly iteration or whatever it is, so that we make sure that we're investing in the excitement attributes. We can also see some risks here. We can look at this and say, I understand certain sorts of attributes are going to have different champions who are going to be pushing it. And particularly, I understand that the excitement attributes, which is where the real value is, nobody is the champion for that. Right? As the product manager or the marketing director or whatever at the client end, or as us in the production team at Agency My, to a large extent, our job is to push for the excitement attributes. And what we absolutely want to avoid is a situation where people can cut corners in a way that leads to long-term failure. So if you imagine a client saying, and this is the worst thing that we can hear, well, one of the worst things we can hear, is a client saying, oh, I only want to spend what we have to spend. Well, what you have to spend is virtually nothing, and it'll be shit, and you'll hate it. Your customers won't like it, you'll be disappointed with it, and then you'll blame us, right? When somebody says to us, we only want to spend what we have to spend, they are saying, disappoint me, right? Now, I kind of end on that point because, as I said at the beginning, a lot of the reason we do these webinars is for our own people internally, for Agency My's production team. And so here's a kind of challenge for the Monday morning production meeting. Let's spend 15 minutes discussing this on Monday. But other people watching this video should find this intriguing as a thought experiment. Agency My's core value is mutual regard, respect, if you like. Right? So we have to respect the client. We have to respect the client's intelligence. We are not here to lie to the client. We're not here to manipulate the client. We're not here to screw the client over. Now, a conventional agency way to approach this, and I got this from head of products at head of projects at one of the Saatchi agencies a few years ago. And she was great. She said, look, the job of business development is to get as much money as possible out of the client. And my job is to spend as much of it as possible. So a project manager within that Saatchi agency was in just as much trouble for coming in under budget as over budget. So the business development people kind of know that the client's going to try and haggle the price down and cut corners and say, oh, well, we only really need what we really need. We don't really want to invest in all this fluffy stuff that we can't see a business outcome for. Right? So the business development person gets the maximum amount of money out of the client, and then the project manager makes sure that it's spent. And where is it spent? Well, look at the chart. It's going to be spent largely on excitement attributes because that's where you make the impact. Now, if you start from the assumption we're here to hoodwink the client for their own benefit, that's a really good strategy. And to a certain extent, if you look at conventional agencies, the difference between the good ones and the bad ones is the good ones are honest about that. And they will say, great, we've got this budget, now we use it for the client. The bad ones are the charlatans who go, fantastic, we've screwed as much money as possible out of the client, we're keeping it as profit. Okay, so the good ones will make a profit by excelling, but with a reasonable margin. The bad ones are just looking to gouge the client. But what they're all doing is they're getting the maximum revenue, and then they decide where it goes. What we tend to do, because we've got this notion of involving the client and working with them collaboratively and all the rest of this stuff, which sounds great, is we tend to give them choices. And we will say to them, well, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. So this is what we absolutely have to spend, and then here are a bunch of options, and let's discuss where we add the value. And we have some phenomenal clients. You know, off the top of my head, I can think of half a dozen people who are just spectacular to work with. And they don't always make the decisions that we would have chosen or that are necessarily ideal for us, but who cares? They're making really good, intelligent decisions. They're ensuring that there's investment where the investment needs to be made. They're managing their stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera. But occasionally we get clients that we really want to work for, but they're just not capable of having those conversations. They will always say, oh, we just want to spend what we want to spend. Oh, sorry, we will always spend the minimum, right? Just spend what we have to, which is basically saying disappoint us. So how do we keep that sense of we're giving you options, we're helping you manage your budget, we can show you where the money's going, we're going to deal with you with kind of respect and integrity and help you make better decisions? How do we marry that with the fact that perhaps the best way that we invest money to maximize the impact of the work is to lie, right? Now, I'm not willing to start lying to clients, by the way. So for the Agency My folks listening to this, I'm not looking for the answer, we should do what Saatchi do and just lie to the client, right? That's harsh, by the way. If anybody from Saatchi is listening to this, don't sue me. I mean it in the most positive, constructive way. Sarge, you're awesome, right? They do fantastic work, but they don't have this approach of saying, we're going to be transparent with you about what you really need to spend, and then after that, you can add extras on. They'll just go for, we're going to do something awesome. So without that, without losing sight on this core value of mutual regard, how do we use this to invest budget to maximize impact for the client?